Some people experience attention the way others experience noise. It's not painful, it's not scary, it's just too much. When attention lands on them, their mind doesn't think, "This is exciting." It thinks, "Now I have to perform." They become aware of how they're standing, how they're speaking, how they're being perceived, not in an anxious way, but in a draining way. For these people, attention doesn't feel like validation. It feels like responsibility. Once eyes are on them, there's pressure to respond correctly, react the right way, stay interesting, and not disappoint. And that pressure quietly pulls energy instead of giving it. That's why they often prefer listening over talking, observing over reacting, being present without being visible. Not because they don't have thoughts, but because their thoughts feel clearer when they're not being watched. In a world that rewards visibility, that preference can feel confusing. But for them, peace begins the moment the spotlight fades. They don't avoid attention because they're hiding. They avoid it because, without it, they can finally breathe normally. One of the biggest misunderstandings about people who avoid attention is the assumption that they're insecure. But avoiding attention isn't the same as doubting yourself. Insecurity comes from questioning your worth. Privacy comes from protecting your energy. And those two things feel very different on the inside. Many people who stay out of the spotlight actually know who they are. They just don't feel the need to explain it out loud. They don't need constant feedback. They don't need reactions to feel real. Their sense of self exists quietly, without an audience. In fact, attention can interrupt that clarity. When people start watching, judging, and responding, the focus shifts outward. And for someone who thinks deeply, that outward shift feels distracting, not empowering. That's why some people share less online, why they post rarely, why they don't feel the urge to update everyone about their life. Not because they're hiding something, but because their life feels more stable when it isn't being commented on. In American culture, visibility is often tied to confidence. If you speak up, you're strong. If you stay quiet, something must be wrong. But that's a cultural habit, not a psychological rule. Some personalities are built for expression. Others are built for reflection. Neither is broken. They're just oriented differently. This preference to avoid attention usually doesn't appear overnight. It forms slowly, often earlier in life than people realize. For many people, being noticed once came with pressure. Maybe expectations were high. Maybe mistakes were remembered longer than successes. Or maybe attention always meant having to explain yourself. Over time, the mind makes a quiet connection. Being seen starts to feel like being evaluated. And being evaluated feels heavy. So, the brain adapts. It learns that staying in the background feels calmer, safer, and more predictable. Not because something is wrong, but because the nervous system prefers stability. This isn't about fear, it's about efficiency. The mind chooses the path that costs the least emotional energy. That's why these people often feel most like themselves when they're unnoticed. Their thoughts flow more freely. Their reactions feel more natural. They don't have to manage how they're coming across. When attention is removed, they don't disappear. They actually become more present. And once this pattern forms, it often follows them into adulthood, at work, in friendships, even in relationships. Not as a limitation, but as a preference. A quiet way of moving through the world that feels balanced from the inside. Because our culture rewards visibility, people who avoid attention are often misunderstood. They're labeled as shy, distant, or lacking confidence, even when none of that is true. In reality, these labels say more about social expectations than about the person themselves. In a world that celebrates being loud, being quiet can easily be mistaken for weakness. But confidence doesn't always look the same. It doesn't always mean speaking first, sharing more, or being seen by everyone. Sometimes confidence shows up as not needing to prove anything at all. Many people who avoid attention are comfortable with who they are. They just don't rely on constant visibility to feel valid. The problem starts when they're pressured to act differently, to explain themselves, to perform confidence in a way that doesn't feel natural. Over time, that pressure becomes exhausting. Not because they're incapable, but because they're being asked to move against their natural rhythm. When society only recognizes loud confidence, quiet strengths often go unnoticed. Depth, focus, thoughtfulness. And when those qualities aren't reflected back, people may begin to question themselves. Not because something is wrong, but because their way of being is rarely acknowledged. Understanding this changes everything. It allows people to stop fighting their nature and start respecting it. Because confidence isn't about being seen by everyone. It's about being at ease with yourself, even when no one is watching. When you stop viewing attention avoidance as a weakness, something shifts. What once looked like hesitation starts to look like discernment. People who don't seek attention often choose their moments carefully. They speak when they have something meaningful to say, not just something to add. This gives their words weight. When they do speak, people tend to listen because it's intentional, not constant. The same is true of their presence. They notice details others miss. They read the room before reacting. In work, this often shows up as focus. In relationships, it shows up as depth. In life, it shows up as consistency, not performance. They don't need to be the center of attention to make an impact. Their influence comes from steadiness, not spotlight. And when these people find environments that respect quiet strengths, they often thrive. They lead without dominating. They influence without insisting. What looks invisible on the surface is often powerful underneath. The real issue isn't that they avoid attention. It's that attention is often treated as the only form of confidence that matters. Once that belief is questioned, their way of being no longer feels like something to overcome. It feels like something to protect. If you've ever felt out of place for not wanting attention, this video isn't here to tell you to change. It's here to remind you that your way of being already makes sense. Not everyone is meant to be loud. Not everyone is meant to be visible all the time. Some people are built for depth, reflection, and presence without performance. When you understand that, the pressure to explain yourself starts to fade. You stop forcing confidence that doesn't feel natural and begin trusting the quiet confidence that's already there. And when you stop fighting that part of yourself, life feels lighter, calmer, more aligned. If this resonated with you, take it as a sign that you're not alone in feeling this way. And if you want more psychology that explains quiet personalities without judging them, you can stay here. More videos like this are coming.